Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for today's College and Research Libraries Forum. My name is Sarah Steiner and I'm the social media editor for the journal. And today we're going to have an excellent session. We're going to highlight 2 articles from our most recent issue, which is the ACRL Assessment in Action Special Edition. And we have a couple of guest editors with us today from that issue. Lisa Janicke Hinchliffe is going to be moderating the session, and Kara Mollenfont is also with us here on the recording. So thanks to them, and also thanks to our excellent speakers who are going to introduce themselves to you shortly. So the intent of these sessions is to give you a chance to interact with and ask questions of the study authors. So to that end, I'm going to put up some contact options that you can use to send them questions. So there's a web form here in the middle. There's a URL to it here in the middle of the screen. I'm going to be watching that web form as the session goes on. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, you can also send us messages there, and Lisa will be reading them to the authors. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here.
Great. And thank you, Sarah, for your great work always managing these sessions. It's my pleasure and privilege to get to speak on behalf of myself and my co-editors, Kara Mollenfont and Deborah Gilchrist, who work together with all of our wonderful authors to put together this special issue of College and Research Libraries, and to really highlight the way that action research can be used to do research in our libraries in order to put forward an understanding of what is happening in our libraries and what value we are creating through our work that we do together. What I'd like to do is ask our speakers today to introduce themselves, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brandy to start with.
Hi, I'm Brandy Whitlock. I'm the professor and instruction librarian at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
Hi, I'm Kevin Engel. I'm the science librarian at Grenell College in Grinnell, Iowa.
I'm Julia Bauder. I'm the Social Studies and Data Services Librarian and Interim Librarian of the college at Grinnell.
And I'm Phil Jones. I'm a humanities librarian and I coordinate research services at Grinnell.
Great, and welcome to all of our speakers today who have joined me and taken time to share a little bit about their projects. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started by asking Brandy to tell us a little bit about her study and how she structured it and what she found when she pursued it.
We have a very complicated structure. We studied using multiple and mixed measures. So we started with the college's curriculum map, which for every degree-bearing program shows where what courses in that program are mapped to particular core competencies for the college. We have 10 core competencies, and information literacy is one of them. So we use the curriculum map to find the courses that are mapped to information literacy, and then we generated a random sample of graduating students. And we asked for artifacts from those courses, coursework that the students had completed that would show us evidence of information literacy skills. And then librarians scored those artifacts we tried to score for 4 categories. Only 3 of them were really viable categories that we could find evidence for, but we scored them for choice of sources, we scored for incorporation of sources, and ethical use of sources. We would have liked to have scored for evaluation of sources, but most of the products that we received did not have evidence of evaluation. Something like an annotated bibliography would have been great, but we received very few of those. So once we had scored those student artifacts, when we asked for them, we also asked for instructors to send us their assignments so that we could be sure to take the assignment into account as we looked at the product that came from those assignments. And we used a checklist that was developed for a whole different project by an English professor and one of our librarians, our reference librarian here. But we used that checklist to see how or where in those assignments instructors were asking students to perform these information literacy tasks or to show evidence of their information literacy skills. And then as a final sort of piece of data, we wanted to see to find out more about how the faculty were teaching and assessing information literacy in these courses that were mapped to information literacy. And so we developed a faculty survey that we administered. And what we found was that the majority of student work that we scored did not meet proficient levels in any of the categories that we scored for. And we also found that the faculty survey, along with the assignment checklist, indicated that overall, in the directions that students were receiving, they weren't regularly, those directions didn't regularly express specific expectations that the instructors had about how students should perform these information literacy tasks or how they should demonstrate these skills.
Okay, great. That's very helpful for getting that overview. I'm wondering if you could go ahead and just say a little bit more about how you shared those findings out with the rest of your team on campus. I got a good sense there of how you did the analysis, but what was the communication afterwards?
So we were communicating, we took data over the course of 3 semesters, and we communicated the data every semester to the college community. So we had multiple mechanisms for doing that, including the Learning Outcomes Assessment Plan, which is from the Director of Learning Outcomes Assessment in her office, and then also reports from her office that came forward from our process, and then our data were described and discussed at faculty orientations, at the convocation. So there were a lot of instances of communicating this information out to the college community at large.
Great. That's really helpful to understand kind of how you close the loop a little bit. Grinnell, you want to do the parallel for us?
Yeah, I'm Kevin. I'll start the story here. We saw this as a real opportunity to really see what our students were learning out of our research literacy sessions. Of course, as in all places, we taught these for years. We've gotten positive feedback. Nobody was telling us that we needed to stop doing something or do something a different way, but we didn't really know what students were learning. So what we did was we worked with one class in each of our college's 3 academic divisions, a Spanish class from humanities, an economics seminar from social studies, and a psychology class from our science division. Total of 40 students. The students were asked to do a draft bibliography of 5 items. Now this was part of an ongoing assignment that was already in the course. It wasn't a new assignment, but it was part of an ongoing assignment. They did a draft bibliography. Those draft bibliographies were then turned back to the librarian. We took a look at those, and then in conjunction with the faculty member, we planned a research literacy session that kind of focused on the strengths and weaknesses that came out of those bibliographies. We delivered the session. The students then revised the bibliographies, and then the assignment proceeded. Toward the end of the semester, when the assignments were turned in each class, we then shortly thereafter gave the students and the faculty member a survey form. The students looked at the items on their final bibliography, and they judged them on 3 criteria: relevance, authority, and timeliness. They scored them numerically, plus they provided us some qualitative data to some questions. The faculty member judged both the items on the draft bibliography and the final bibliography, again scoring them on those 3 criteria: relevance, authority, and timeliness. And I'll turn it over to Julia.
So I just want to emphasize that these were students who were in 200 level or 300 level classes, so not first year students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And their faculty rated them as finding good sources before, on their draft bibliographies, before we did the information literacy sessions. So because there wasn't a lot of room for improvement, we actually didn't see an improvement in the sources on their revised bibliographies. But the qualitative data, where we asked them to answer some open-ended questions about their research and what they had learned from the information literacy session, they reported learning a lot. And then when we compared the students' ratings and the faculty's ratings of the sources, the students actually judged their sources to be significantly less timely and authoritative than the faculty did, which is not what we were expecting. Usually students are overconfident rather than underconfident. So we had all these discrepancies between the different types of data we collected. So that's the mixed messages we refer to in the title of the article.
Great. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Phil. Did you want to add to that?
No, it's okay.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for including in that discussion how you involve students in it. I think this is a particularly interesting example of the kind of inclusion and democracy that we see happening when we do action research, and that if we can even include students as part of this. One of the things, though, that you probably had to do was sort of give up some of the control that you would have had if you didn't involve all these other parties. So what additional steps did you have to take in order to engage students in this way?
Okay, I will take the microphone. Well, we decided, I'll back up just a little bit, we decided to include students basically because as we did the literature review for this project, we saw that primarily librarians would rate sources in citation analysis studies, which is really the format that we were working in. Faculty would do that work some of the time, but we saw very little indication in the literature that students were involved in rating their own sources or communicating their opinion of what they found. I will say that the literature of citation analysis is huge and it's long lasting, so I'm not going to say that that's never been done before, but I will say that it's not done very often.
Sure.
So what did we have to do? I mean, yes, you did have to, I think we had to push ourselves, perhaps, I'll use that word, a bit to the side. Librarianship is a service profession, and the analysis of papers is a big job, and I think maybe we may have felt a bit compelled to get involved in that work so that the faculty members would be more involved or more likely, perhaps, to take part in the study. But what we also had to do was talk with our faculty colleagues and get them to make time in their courses for this rating to take place. That wasn't, but because we worked with people that we collaborate with on a regular basis, that really wasn't that hard. And that's one of the reasons, honestly, we had the students evaluate just their final bibliographies and not the draft, because we felt like, frankly, we were lucky to get the 25 minutes that it took to accomplish that task in a class during a semester. Yeah, but we didn't know what we were going to get in terms of getting responses from the students, so we decided to go ahead and do it because we were trying to make our project useful to the students, so we wanted information that was coming from them.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting to think about, sort of just how you make all of that happen. So, you know, I think both of you mentioned a little bit about what motivated you to undertake your studies, but maybe we'll start with Grenell this time to say a little bit more about what motivated you to ask this question.
Well, this is Phil again. Well, I would say that one of the motivators was coming well beyond the confines of our campus, and that is just the role of assessment in higher education right now. It's there, and specifically, we had a nudge, I will say, from our president. He had actually seen some promotional material about the AIA program in an email he received from the Council of Independent Colleges. He forwarded it to our director, a dean, and a couple other associate deans, and he wanted to know why wouldn't we participate. So we did. But on top of that too, we, as Kevin mentioned earlier, we really were looking for an opportunity to look at, I'll say, to do a performance assessment, to look at some students' actual work rather than base the planning of our program on students' opinions or self-reports only, which is what we tend to get and base a lot of our decisions and how we teach and how we make changes on those kinds of things. I will say toward the end of closing the loop, when our article was published in College and Research Libraries Online just this month, I did send the link to our president. And he was pleased to see that we had completed the project and that we had found a fine, high-profile venue, and that he added our article to his airport reading material that week. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, great. All right, so Brandy, tell us about sort of how did you choose among all the things that you could have assessed to focus the way that you did?
Well, we are lucky, I think, here at AACC to have a strong culture of assessment. And so we had already been through the process of assessing 2 of our core competencies before we embarked on studying information literacy. So we already had a process in place. There were already teams involved across the campus, so we already had quite a few practitioners and stakeholders already in the loop and in the process. So it was fairly easy to come up with the focus that we wanted to take. It was actually harder to find the other mechanisms that we used aside from the authentic assessment, this faculty survey, the assignment checklist, those sorts of things. They came later on as we got sort of more into the project.
And what motivated those? Were those things that other people on campus brought up, or those things that the library sort of said, you know what, could we add these? I mean, you were working with a campus team in the AIA, so how did that dynamic work for you?
So I think mostly it came from the librarians because we were the scorers for the authentic assessment that we were doing. And so we needed to see the assignments in order to feel like we could best score the student work. And then as we started to look at the assignments, we realized it was hard to score a student poorly for something when clearly the directions for the assignment were asking for that poor thing. And so we wanted to be able to make some correlations, if we could, between what we were seeing in the assignment directions and what we were seeing in the student work.
Yeah, that's interesting the way you just said that, you know, if they're giving us what we asked for, we probably can't complain too much, but we should probably be clearer on what we intended to ask for. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing where sometimes assessment that we think is going to actually assess student learning ends up assessing our program as to have we actually set students up to succeed the way we thought we did.
Exactly.
And so that's, yeah, it's an indirect and yet probably really powerful finding.
Yes.
Yeah. So what data sources, you mentioned a little bit, like, so you did all this scoring, but remind us the data sources that you use, Brandy. I mean, you just mentioned a bunch of different things that you were trying to read. Yeah. So, and you know, what kind of data was that? Was that qualitative data, quantitative data?
We almost exclusively quantitative, although we did find, we did have some open-ended questions on our survey that allowed us to look at some qualitative, but mostly it was quantitative data. We used a rubric to score on a 4-point scale student work in those 3 or 4 categories that I mentioned before, and they were scored from emerging to developing, which would both of those would be considered non-proficient, and then proficient and exemplary would be on the proficient side. And then in our checklist, it was really just a checklist. Do we find this information or not in this assignment? So we didn't score the extent to which any of those things appeared, only if they appeared or if we didn't find evidence of them in the assignment. And I should mention, too, that just because the assignment didn't contain those directions doesn't mean the instructor didn't provide better directions in person. We were only able to look at the articles of the artifacts that we had. And assess those. So I don't want to make it sound as if we didn't, we assumed that was all of the information that students were receiving. And then when we administered the faculty survey, we'd really hoped that it would go out to a wider faculty pool, but we were only able to administer it to the folks who were sending in artifacts from those courses that were mapped to information literacy. Some of our offices here are concerned about survey overload for our faculty and our students, and so we do want to be careful about sort of how we deploy those.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So it sounds like what you really were doing was taking a lot of qualitative data and sort of analyzing it into quantitative in many cases.
Many cases, yes. That's what the rubric does, right? It allows you to quantify those qualitative things.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's something that's always a little tricky to keep in mind, but very, very important. So let's go ahead and bring back Grenell here, and you'll have to unmute yourself. I muted you a couple seconds ago. And ask that same question. What was the data that you were using? You kind of have described it in the midst of your paragraphs, but maybe you could just run it down for us a little bit more.
The data we were using. So again, we had 40 students complete rough and revised bibliographies of 5 items. They then rated that material, the faculty and students, on timeliness, authority, and relevance on a 5-point scale. And we also gathered qualitative information. We asked 3 questions, which we really worked at a bit. We tried to make them not your typical end of a research literacy feedback form kind of question. So we asked things like, did you omit sources appearing on your draft bibliography into your revised one, and if so, why? And we wanted to know, of all the sources in your bibliography, which single one influenced you most, influenced your thinking on your topic. And then just to get an overview, what 2 or 3 main points did you learn in the research literacy sessions have stuck with you or have proven most meaningful? So.
Okay. So again, and then you coded these sometimes into a rubric, but sometimes with the open-ended, you did a more thematic look at things, or?
That's right. What we did with the responses to those qualitative, to the qualitative data was we coded it using an in vivo.
Oh, okay.
And then we ran some cross tabulations, which did not prove particularly fruitful, but nonetheless we did coding, and that allowed us to sort through and just look at frequency of responses as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think sometimes it's the real nitty-gritty, but sometimes carrying this stuff out has that logistics level. It's like, no, but literally, how did you do it? Yeah, so in vivo for that qualitative kind of thematic coding. So that's really helpful. So, you've said a little bit about your findings, but if you had to say sort of what did you? Let's jump ahead a little bit, and this is actually a question from the audience. So let me bring it in here. So you have your findings, and then what did you do with them? What happened? Because they weren't quite exactly what maybe you were hoping for, like, right? The whole mixed experience.
Yeah. I guess I'll start. So we had hoped, of course, that our students were more proficient at these particular skills, or that we would find evidence of these information literacy skills. And so we started to, right away, the first semester after we scored we started to develop faculty professional development opportunities. Nassim, who could not be with me today, who was my co-author, she was the Director of Learning Outcomes Assessment at the time at AACC. She's since taken a promotion at a different college locally, but she and I provided some faculty professional development opportunities at our college orientation in the fall of 2015, and in the even in the spring of 2015, in fact. And then we went to the adjunct faculty conference that we have on campus, and we gave our talk there, and we changed the talk later on, and gave it again in different places. So we were talking a lot and to a lot of different people about not just the data that we gathered, but what we could do about it. And so how to create better research assignments, how to be explicit in your research assignments with the expectations that you had for students to demonstrate these skills, etc. So in the summer of 2015, we devoted an entire seminar, basically, or a summer institute to information literacy. And the Summer Institute is a faculty's professional development opportunity that is a 2-day experience for faculty. And we have a keynote speaker come, we have breakout sessions, and they were all focused on information literacy and helping people to understand how to best teach and assess that those skills. And there's been a lot of other things that have happened too from the data. I don't know if you want me to go on, but maybe I should talk especially about improving the curriculum map. That's something that we found really critical when we've done these kinds of assessments in the past with other core competencies at the college. One thing we notice is some people are mapping to information literacy and they're not actually able to give us any information literacy artifacts from their courses. And so we felt like that's a big step in managing that curriculum map and making sure it's actually accurate.
So just to clarify, the curriculum map here is supposed to be something that describes the way the curriculum is being carried out across the campus, and InfoLit is one component of that map.
That's correct. That's correct. So we have 10 core competencies, and each program, degree-seeking program at the college, has to map within their programs where their courses assess and develop those 10 core competencies.
I see. Yeah. So obviously, if the map isn't accurate, then any assessment you do based on that map is gonna, that error is just gonna perpetuate through.
Exactly. So we knew that we needed to tighten that map, and part of that process has been to develop. We developed a rubric, for instance, to do the assessment process, but that rubric wasn't available to people when they were deciding what courses to map to information, right? So the information that's come out of our assessment process then can help with the refining of that map and making sure that it's accurate.
Great. Well, let's turn it over to Grinnell, and in some ways, I think you have a similar situation in that if you didn't find exactly what you might have hoped for or thought you would have, what has been your next steps? What did you do about the data that you found and what you learned from your project?
Well, we created a number of recommendations which are actually listed in the article. A couple of them in particular, and I will say in the sort of the context of all this is that during this academic year, particularly this semester, we have been communicating with faculty quite a bit about these directions that we would recommend going. And so I would say at Grinnell, you can't mandate anything. And so it's sort of a process of negotiation.
Right.
But a couple of things. Another thing I want to mention is, as was mentioned in the article, the new ARL framework, which seemed to fit our situation very specifically. And the ARL framework kind of turns the sort of a library instruction which has been going on prior to that sort of on its head. So a couple of things.
So just to be clear, you're talking about the ACRL framework for information literacy? Okay, just want to make sure we don't confuse our audience. That's all right.
I dropped a letter there. That's
you did, and just I didn't want, suddenly everyone's Googling for what?
Yeah.
Great, glad we're on the same page.
Anyway, so a couple of things. Traditionally, there's one required class at Grinnell, and that's the first semester tutorial. All new students take it. Grinnell is an open curriculum. That's really the only required class for everyone. And traditionally, we would do library instruction in there. It's intended to be an introduction to the library, induction to library personnel. Some tutors would have their students do things, a pretty in-depth research project. Others wouldn't. But one of the things that was often stressed there was, we got to talk about critical evaluation of sources. But faculty would say, well, I want you to teach skills. I want you to teach Boolean. I want you to prevent databases and how to do those things. And so always the part about critical evaluation tended to be left toward the end, or you wouldn't have enough time for that. So when we looked at the results of our study, when we looked at the ACRL framework, and we said, at the 100 level, at the beginning level, the 100 level of courses where primarily first-year students are involved, we think teaching skills is still important. You know, these students are coming into college now, and they have been searching databases literally since they were born.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're used to searching databases. But it's still important, I think, at that level to present them with an array of potentially useful databases, but teach things like Boolean and phrase searching and keyword and things like that, because they can get better, they can be more efficient, and it's important from that point on. One of the things, however, that we wanted to add was to do an emphasis at that level on critical evaluation, something that had often been left out before.
Mm-hmm.
And so this past fall, for instance, my own experience in working with tutorials, with 3 of the tutorials, well, I actually talked to more of them, but in 3 of the tutorials, the faculty agreed to add time to do critical evaluation. I said, you know, this is important. Look at the ACRL framework.
Mm-hmm.
You know, students are going to find information. They may not search the best database. They may not be efficient, but they will find something, and then they got to know what to do with it once they got it.
Right.
So having 5 minutes at the end of class to teach evaluation is not enough. So
Right.
I talked to faculty, and 3 of them agreed to add a separate session, 40 minutes, on critical evaluation, where we looked at appropriateness of sources, authority, validity. We did large group and small group exercises. And in one of these 3 sessions, one of the instructors wanted to do it all as part of one really long session. That didn't work out very well. It's better to do it in a separate session a week or so later.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things where we're bringing in this emphasis on evaluation at the 100 level, still teaching skills, that's important, but bringing in this evaluation and in actually adding time for this. One of our recommendations, however, was once we got beyond the 100 level of courses into the 200 level and above, when it was principally 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year students, was, you know, what we found in the study was that students can find information. They can find information. They may not search the exact database. They may not be the greatest in Boolean searching. They can find information that's rated highly by faculty. So let's concentrate on the questions that students actually have. And the questions were, we found this stuff, now what do we do with it? What do we have?
Yeah.
And so focus on those things at the top of the pyramid on the new ACRL framework on evaluation. Is this source appropriate to use in this particular project? You know, is it valid? Is it useful? What is authority? If it is, you take that information, how do you use it in your particular project? Focus on those things and spend less time or no time at all on skills things.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily need to know about Boolean. They might not even need to know about databases. But if you're running out of time on something, that's where you need to run out of time on. So focus on evaluation, focus on, you got the information, now what do you do with it? So at 200 level and above, that's our emphasis right now, though I will say that that is in negotiation with faculty, because a lot of faculty still say, yes, I got senior seminar, I want you to teach them skills, but it's kind of talking to them and sometimes doing that in a different way.
Right.
In a different way. But the main emphasis is on, you got information, what do you got, how are you going to use it?
Yeah. Yeah, and interesting just to sort of see how sort of revealing that students maybe have these differing perceptions than faculty also lets you have that conversation with faculty about, well, it's an interesting thing if the faculty are happier with the quality of the sources than the students themselves were, saying, well, what's the disconnect? Because, you know, that's exactly, as it was pointed out earlier, kind of the opposite of what we would typically expect. We would expect the learner to think they had found higher quality, but there's a disconnect either way that we need to figure out how to remedy. So an interesting problem to sort of the inverse of what we'd expect.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's really great to hear. Also, I think sometimes people worry that if you find out that maybe your instruction isn't as effective as you intended it to be, that you'll lose the chance to do instruction. And what I hear you telling us is actually in your case, you were able to use that to say, actually what this is evidence is students need more instruction.
Yes.
And at least some of your faculty are saying, yeah, that's exactly right. So it's that fear we have about assessment. Did that enter into any of your discussions of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if we share these results?
Well, it is, but it's also, I just want to add one thing about working with faculty, you know, faculty sometimes are extremely prescriptive in assignments.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll say, find X number of sources from these specific journals.
Right.
And in working with faculty now, because you're sort of teaching these not just skills, but maybe higher concepts, and asking faculty maybe not be so prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
When you give an assignment, don't even mention a number maybe, but also don't restrict them to a certain thing and say, just find me 5 or 10 or whatever important sources, and then whether it's an annotated bibliography assignment or something, the student then has to prove to the faculty member why this source is important enough and valuable enough to be used in the paper. Have them think about it rather than you leading them by the hand, because at some point they will graduate, they will go on to graduate school and other things. They got to figure these things out for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking about it. Once you've labeled it, oh, it's from the approved journal, you've really short-circuited the critical thinking process. Yeah, that's an interesting way of saying it for a student. Like, can you prove to me you found something good? Yeah. Great. Brandy, you know, as you've had these conversations with your faculty, are you seeing this kind of evolution in sort of emphasis within information literacy as well? Maybe striving a little bit more to understand, like, information use almost is maybe what I'd say, rather than just the, can I track it down and retrieve a PDF?
Right. Yeah. We lost our Director of Learning Outcomes Assessment before the fall semester started. So we've been without a director in that office for some time. So the library has had to take more of a leadership role rather than a partnership that I think we would have had. But we're getting ready to hire someone new, and so we're going to have that partnership start up again, and I'm really excited about that. So far, I've had a number of faculty who've attended the professional development opportunities that we've provided. I was also asked to come and talk to the cohort of new full-time faculty. We have a learning college here for our new full-time faculty, and after that experience, I had 5 or 10 emails asking me to come and talk to students or to come and talk to faculty about information literacy and teaching, assessing, and those sorts of things. So it's definitely started a lot of dialogue across the campus, and it's definitely started a lot of conversations for me with particular faculty members. But we're still struggling to close that loop and to find ways to make sure that we are making concerted, documented efforts to improve this particular core competency. And I think once we have our Director of Learning Outcomes Assessment installed, we'll be able to get on that job a little better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always difficult when some of your capacity disappears. So, you know, with the challenges that you faced in this, let's maybe pull back now from the specifics of your particular cases, and, you know, what are some of the challenges that you faced in doing this kind of research that would lead you to some advice to other librarians if they came to you and said, you know what, we've decided we're going to take an action research approach and we're going to look at the way either, you know, something parallel to the project that you did. What's like the top couple pieces of advice you might turn to that colleague and say, well, here's a few thoughts. So maybe we'll let Grenell start this time.
Well, the first thing I would say is I wrote a chapter on this very subject for the ACRL publication, Putting Assessment into Action, Selected Projects from the First Cohort. So that came out the beginning of this year or so. So there are 25 reflections in there that I think get to this kind of thing. But what I would say is that this kind of work takes a while. Between application to assessment and action and publication, which is how, in a way, ours culminated in college research libraries, was 3 years. So that may not be the trajectory of everybody's project. The outcome and the application of the findings may stay more local than that, but nonetheless, they take time. So that's one of the things I would say, is for people to expect that and work with it and plan for it. it may be natural, but it's not always advisable to divide the work up into individual assignments. We had some challenges with, I would say, data analysis and maybe curation. So if there are a couple pair of eyes on that very important component of research, that's a good thing. And I would say that's from creating and running Excel spreadsheets all the way up to in vivo coding in our case, just because we don't see things the same. And one of the challenges that we faced, and I think it may be kind of if people were going the in vivo route, is that coding we felt is best done by a librarian or someone intimately familiar with the data and with the process, rather than, say, a student assistant or an administrative assistant or someone of the sort. So staying with someone really who's close to the project. Time. I mentioned it takes 3 years, but it's a lot of work during that 3 years or however long the project runs from beginning to end. So you probably need to work with your director, superior, coworkers, and make arrangements for this to happen, because it will bear fruit. It's just that it takes time to plan, to run the study, and then to do the analysis, and then to write it up and share it. And those are all really important steps. We did the bulk of the work during regular semesters, and then I was fortunate to have a sabbatical on which I wrote the article with the help of my colleagues here. And the other thing I would say is, this may sound obvious, but just like we tell first-year students, you really need to stay focused on your subject. It's very true. You're going to discover all kind of interesting strands and ideas, and you really need to look at those in terms of future research topics, and maybe keep a folder or something to that extent. But we started off, I would say, perhaps a bit overly ambitious, and collected maybe 2 or 3 reams of data that we didn't end up needing. And maybe we'll get to using that in some point, but I think that we may have saved ourselves some effort, and other people as well, if we had been more focused from the outset.
Okay, that's great. Brandy, would you build on that in any way?
Sure. I would say our biggest challenges were procuring student artifacts. I think people have a difficult time sometimes doing that. We changed the process a little bit. The second and third time that we asked for, the second and third semesters that we asked for student artifacts that demonstrated information literacy skills, we made sure to CC deans and department chairs on a lot of those emails that went out to faculty. That seemed to help a little bit. So whenever you can provide a carrot, that's wonderful. Occasionally you might have to use the stick, and to really get the folks to provide you the materials that you need. It can take a little bit of cajoling. And then we also had difficulty managing the time that it takes to do this kind of research. Our librarians we run a very lean ship here, and the librarians were the only people who scored. We scored 322 artifacts among 4 librarians. And so those were whole days, and not only the artifacts but also the assignments that came with them. So a particular artifact could take you 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes to score if you had to read it very, very closely. And so that time is especially important. So yes, I would definitely agree with our Grinnell colleagues in saying that you need to enlist the help of your director, the help of your fellow librarians especially. It's invaluable to this process, and I'm very grateful to have had those experiences with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like in both cases there's that question of really calibrating effort. Hopefully, in the end, the outcome has been worth it for the effort that you had to put in. So, I want to ask, I see a couple of questions have come in, so let me, I guess there's a question here that I think is kind of interesting, and it really steps us back and asks, the question is, what do you feel is the most under-assessed activity in the library that we should be looking at to show our impact? So you chose something that you thought would have impact locally, and yet in both cases it's something that we see assessed in a lot of cases, and I think for good reason. We put a lot of effort into our first-year programs in libraries and our instruction programs generally. Are there other areas that we haven't assessed that we should be potentially looking at to sort of expand our notion of the impact that our libraries are having?
I'll start. I would say that I would like to see a lot more information about the effect that librarians have in their collaborations with faculty to create and revise assignments.
Okay.
I feel like we touch a lot of students that way without actually having touched a student. And it's very difficult to get at that information, but I feel like a lot of the best work I've done to help students in the long run has been working with their professor. And so it's not student learning that I would be interested in assessing in that particular case, but perhaps in a way it's student learning because we're teaching other faculty about the best practices or the best ways to develop and assess these skills. And so can we assess in some way our fellow faculty in their learning of these important strategies?
Right, yeah, I guess we need some sort of rubric for what makes a good assignment and then seeing if we're moving people to it. So Grinnell, I saw you guys were ready too, so I should have, jump in there.
So one thing that we've been looking at assessing and improving is the impact that we have on our student employees and the impact that working in the library has on their postgraduate success in particular. Postgraduate success is one of our campus themes right now, so we're looking at assessing what we are doing, what we can do better to help prepare our students who work in the libraries for jobs after graduation.
That's interesting because I think a lot of us employ students, and we haven't always thought about that in the sort of impact on their education and their lifelong success. They're an employee and we get a lot of work done, and I think we all enjoy them, but really to kind of put that new frame on it's pretty powerful. Phil, you look like maybe you want to jump in too.
Thank you. I did just want to say, I think we might want to broaden, it seems to me, who the people are we ask about what needs to be assessed in libraries, because we're kind of in the reference and instruction realm here, and assessment and that question is really getting at library activities broadly. So, and I just think we need to bring that question up in meetings of all people who work in libraries, and allow them, and put people from different parts of the library, different departments, on committees and in positions to consider assessment options, and we'll get to hear their voices and see what they think, and I have a feeling you'll start to have some other things assessed.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's important to us may not exactly be all the things that might be important if we asked other stakeholders. That's great. So people who are listening in, please do continue to put in your questions, and maybe Sarah will put up on the screen for us again the reminder of how to submit any questions that you might have. We'll keep going forward with some of our other questions that I had given them in advance as the way we might go forward. Are there any particular methodological reflections that you have? You chose a variety of methods actually in both cases to use, and maybe Grinnell, if you want to start with, what method do you feel like bore the most fruit, and what do you think maybe you would probably not do in the future?
It's hard to answer that in some ways because the interesting things we found were in the tension between the two different methods that we used. We would have gotten a very different picture of what was going on had we used just the quantitative rankings of the bibliography or just the qualitative questions. So yeah, I think the value was in how they spoke to each other rather than in either one singly. Okay.
All right. Great. Brandy, how about you?
I completely agree on our end. We would have had a very different picture, a less complete picture of how our students were supposed to be demonstrating these skills, and then how they actually did demonstrate those skills in their work. So I definitely would want to do a mixed methodology in the future for a project like this.
Right. Okay, so there is no AIA Part 2 for, like the second time around for you to participate in, but let's pretend for a moment that there was, and you, Brandy, were proposing and pitching that you should be one of the institutions that got to go through it again. What would you be focusing on in your project in round 2? So would you build off this? Would you go in another direction? What would you do next?
Well, we're building an information literacy plan now to address the closing of the loop at our college and to try to see how we can document that experience, because it's happening whether we show it or have evidence of it. We just would prefer to have that evidence. And so I would probably focus on tightening up some of our pools of people that we were actually asking for information from. So our faculty survey, for instance, only went out to faculty who were teaching courses that were already mapped to information literacy. Well, there might be courses out there that are not yet mapped to information literacy where students are developing those skills and are being asked to demonstrate them. And maybe they need to be mapped to information literacy. Or at the very least, maybe those students and those instructors still need library services and resources to support what they're doing in their coursework. So we don't have that information yet. I would want to expand the pools of people that we got information from. And it would be nice, too, to see some of the student work from those courses, if we could, to compare against other student work in courses that were mapped to information literacy. So I would like to expand the evidence that we were gathering to be able to compare different things.
Great. Okay, Grinnell, part 2.
So we've actually had some discussions about what we're going to do as the follow-up to this, and we haven't reached any decisions yet, but some of the ideas we've talked about are we have to figure out how to assess this new kind of instruction that Kevin's talking about that's more conceptual, more framework-based, which probably can't be assessed by looking at the quality of items on bibliography. So we need to figure out how we're going to assess that. I'm also curious, I'd like to replicate the study with first years and see, are first years coming in able to find good sources, or are they learning that during the first year? We're assuming they're learning that during their first year, but we don't actually know that, so that would be a nice thing to know.
Right, right. Phil, you look like maybe you have a follow-up study too. No.
Well,
your face gave it away.
You read my face, my mind. One of the things that we've also talked about is a challenge that I've heard faculty articulate for years now, and Kevin was touching on it, and that is, what do I do with this stuff once I found it? The students and sources, that is. And so really developing links between libraries and writing centers, and really getting students at early points perhaps in research processes to start imagining the rhetorical use of the sources that they're discovering, be that for a paper or a video or a presentation or some other expression of the research that I've forgotten, but really starting to consider the power and the possibility of the sources for the work that they're going to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Great. All right, so let me just double check here. No more questions coming in. So let me ask you the last question I have for you, which is if you have any closing thoughts, something that I haven't asked you about yet that you were hoping I would, or something that I told you I was going to ask you about and I inadvertently skipped over, or so Brandy, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, I did want to talk about a few more of the next steps that we're taking.
Oh, perfect. Great.
So we delayed the rolling out of a new library tutorial after we started this process, so the assessment process, so that now our library tutorial is going to be a little bit more influenced and informed by the information that we got from the study and the information that the study produced. So, for instance, the rubric that we used is now going to guide a lot of how the information is organized in the tutorial, so that we can see a little bit more clearly where students are learning how to incorporate sources or where they're learning how to find sources. And then I've been asked to be a part of a very small team to develop a faculty professional development center. And I think that's in part because of the work that we've done to develop our faculty's skills in information literacy instruction, and so that's been a really, I think, a powerful touch point for us to be able to reach more faculty and to be involved in the design even of that faculty development center. And then I've been trying to get this credit course off the ground that explores the intersections of critical thinking and information literacy, and it's been just a really difficult process to get someone to partner with me from another college or another part of the college, and now I have that in the works. And so I think that's in part too because of this need that we've seen at the college to create more opportunities for students to gain these information literacy skills. So I know a lot of people think when they do an assessment project, if the students aren't performing to the degree that you hope they would, that's going to affect you poorly. But actually what it's done for us, and I think what it's supposed to do, is shine a light on the places where you need more work and to be able to devote those resources to the work that needs to be done. You have evidence now that says we need more librarians talking to more faculty. We need more librarians doing this work in order for our students to get these skills. So I hope that people will walk away from the assessment process not feeling badly about what's happening, but feeling encouraged in their ability to get that work done.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that sort of perspective on it. So Grinnell, last thoughts from you.
I think it gets down to kind of an orientation of what you're aiming at with your teaching. Grenell College's mission, and probably the missions of many institutions, is all aimed toward, we want to graduate students who can do these things. And at Grinnell, I'm quoting here, graduate individuals who can think clearly, who can speak and write persuasively, who can evaluate critically both their own and others' ideas, who can acquire new knowledge, and so on. And I think the results of our study plus the ACRL framework point at a different orientation. Rather than teaching and helping students get past the next paper, we should be teaching students and helping them get past the next paper, but also take away things that they can use for the rest of their lives. If they leave Grinnell or wherever, and they're not going to have access to the same databases, so they might want them, and they're not going to be faced with the same questions, but they got to be able to go and synthesize a need for information. They got to be able to acquire information and figure out if it's important and be able to use it. So in our teaching, we got to aim not just at what they're doing now, but what they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives. And I think both what we found in our study and both the ACRL framework point to that now. It's just a different orientation.
It's fantastic. I really appreciate both of you sort of saying in many ways that what happened here is your worldview actually shifted and there's new opportunities that have come out. So I want to conclude today's session with a reminder of what the concept of action research is, because I think the stories that you've told today speak to exactly why action research is such a powerful approach to our work in libraries and the assessment and research that we need to do into our program effectiveness. And that definition is one that Kara and Deb and I quoted in the introductory essay to the special issue of College and Research Libraries, that action research is participatory democratic process concerned with developing practical knowledge in the pursuit of worthwhile human purposes, seeks to bring together action and reflection, theory and practice in participation with others, and then this is my favorite part, in pursuit of practical solutions to issues of pressing concern to people, and more generally the flourishing of individual persons and their communities. In some ways exactly what we're about in libraries, and that orientation there just comes out so beautifully in the work that both of your institutions and your teams have done in your own spaces, but I think also what AIA has done, assessment in action with ACRL generally. So I'll end today by reminding everyone that all of the projects that have been undertaken in the ACRL Assessment in Action program are available freely online. The portal page for the Assessment in Action project is ala.org/ACRL/ACRL AIA. And not only are all the projects there are also summary reports of what was learned by those institutions. Coming soon will be the summary of year 2. And the other thing that's there that I think is just so inspiring and amazing is all the presentations and publications that the participants have done to spread the word. So really, we now have that body of knowledge that we can use as a larger community of practice to tell the story of the impact on libraries and the ways that libraries on their institutions, their student learning, their success, and the ways that we need to continue building our work. So we haven't just gone out to prove that we're great. We've gone out to say, and here's how we're going to improve because of the value we know that we are creating in our institutions. So I want to thank all of our panelists today for participating in this session. Again, a shout out to Sarah for making sure that everything ran perfectly. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah for any last minute logistics. Thank you, everyone. A round of applause.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and Phil, Kevin, Julia, and Brandy for being with us today. I hope everybody enjoyed this session as much as I did, and I will be emailing tomorrow morning with the URL and links to everything that you might want. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.